In Taiwan, you get 卤肉饭 in 2 minutes. You text someone, they reply immediately. 在英国，怎么好像每件事都要等，好像什么都得慢慢来，非常考验人的耐心。Wanna get the bill? That's a 20-minute wait. Dentist appointment? Yeah, 3 weeks from now. Need to return something? Enjoy your email thread with 4-day gaps. And thought you were catching a train? Oh no, you weren't. 在世界上很多文化里，大家早就习惯效率至上，什么都要快，马上就要搞定。可是，一到西方，大家似乎看起来一点都不急，完全不赶时间。So what's this about? Well, I have some thoughts for you today. Disclaimer, there are way more reasons for slowness than I can possibly mention in one video, but I'm going to raise a couple cultural ones today as food for thought. So here we go. 大家好，我是戴树轩，我来自英国。我们的西西日语言学院注重以透过文化提升英文能力，轻松聊文化，英文自然来。Check it out at suzuru.com. In another video, I mentioned that the UK tends to be more target-oriented at work, i.e. we focus on achieving the goal and we care less about how that's done. In East Asia, generally speaking, the culture tends to be more process-oriented. This means people often care about following proper steps and protocols in order to achieve something. 那这跟西方做事效率低又有什么关系呢？ Well, I was interested to see this top comment on that video. 我在英国工作2年多，最看不惯就是 target completion-oriented 的做事方式。因为有超过90%的结果都是要从头再做。Such an interesting point. If the process is rushed or shallow, the results can be poor. 如果你习惯了台湾那种比较讲究细节的文化，来到英国真的会觉得很多事让人抓狂。Is this your experience? I wanted to know why we might be like this, so I asked ChatGPT. ChatGPT, old friend, how are you? My fellow culture-shifting, empire-running force of nature. I'm doing wonderfully now that you're here. Fair enough. Why is it that the UK is more target-oriented? She had a lot of historical reasons. A Protestant work ethic. That means the belief that hard work and discipline are moral virtues, even signs of personal godliness. Utilitarianism. A moral philosophy first introduced in 18th century Britain that basically says the right action is the one that produces the greatest happiness for the greatest number of people, i.e. emphasizing results. And economic models that emphasize competition and individual achievement. For example, the increased privatization of various industries we saw in the UK under Thatcher in the 80s. 但问题是，这些东西听起来应该让大家做事更快、更有效率。像什么工作认证啊、结果导向啊、竞争压力啊，听起来都是讲求效率的关键字，不是吗？而照理来说，像是台湾这种受到儒家、佛教、道家影响的地区，或许会更讲求和谐跟尊重。可是，在这样的文化下，很多事情却比西方还更快、更有效率，这不是很矛盾吗？ Well, there are probably a lot of overlapping reasons why East Asian culture can be faster, but a big one, my gut instinct tells me, is because people there just work better together. ChatGPT seemed to agree. So maybe target orientation in the West is tied to our focus on individualism. Individualism, a cultural value where the individual is deemed more important than the group. You see, in the West, we're often, consciously or subconsciously, taught the message, you are special. In the UK, it's not quite like in the US, where the message is, you're amazing, you can do anything you want, dream big, honey. Here, it's more like, you're unique in your own special way, darling, but don't get too big for your boots. That's still a far cry, though, from
不要只想到自己，也要替别人着想.
So I reckon in the UK, when people skip over process to get to the end, it might not be because they don't appreciate or understand the value in having a good process. It's just because they think their way is the right way. This attitude can feel more natural if you've grown up in an individualistic culture. The problem is, at work, if everyone in the room thinks their idea is the best, then they're less likely to effectively put their heads together, come up with a good system, and all stick to it. They might do it for a while, like, yeah, that's a great idea. But after a while, they'll go back to doing their own thing. Not only does individualism make us think we're special, but it's also bound up with this emphasis on having a personality. Our personalities are very important. In fact, they can make or break our careers, and standing out is often rewarded. There might be more emphasis on things like speak your mind, follow your passion, be yourself. There's a logic that authenticity, being your true self, is morally good, and having a distinct personality can be a sign of maturity, confidence, and independence. I'll come back to this shortly. If you're watching this, you might be interested in different cultures, maybe the UK specifically, maybe you're someone who wants to improve or practice your English. Let's face it, learning English at school was tedious for a lot of you guys, but since leaving school, you might have found that it would actually be really useful if you could speak confidently and articulately about a range of topics in English. Why? Well, it can open doors to higher paying jobs, improve relationships at work, get you into an English-speaking university, and allow you to actually enjoy the experience, and even help you settle into an English-speaking country long-term without feeling disconnected and isolated.
但是英文要怎样才可以更上一层楼呢？
How do you get past the plateau? As a language learner myself, I often find that beyond the basics, you end up having to figure out a lot of things by yourself. Why do people behave like this? What do they mean when they say that? Why are there so many everyday references that I just don't get? It would be so helpful if someone could just lay it all out clearly so you can deeply understand the culture at the same time as improving your language skills.
那为什么学英文的同时也要了解文化呢？
Well, without culture, language is kind of inert. It'll get you communicating, but it won't get you understanding local people and the way they think, which is ultimately how you can make true connections in a different language.
语言不就是拿来跟真人互动的吗？
Think of all the stuff you know about your own culture. All the books, films, famous references, politics, history, stereotypes, trends, humor. You take it all for granted, but it forms the basis of your worldly knowledge. And it differs drastically around the world. We just assume people are on the same page because we've got this full sense of connection through the internet.
问题是，不少人习惯把母语的说法直接翻成英文，觉得对方一定懂，结果却常常产生误解，或者意思往往南辕北辙。
You see, it's hard to understand a different culture on your own. We're basically talking about transplanting a different cultural brain into yours. We here at CZWU have put together the ultimate learning journey for you.
全方位英语文化课程。
We've blended self-paced and communal learning in our very own little online university, or university. Rather than just passively learning through the internet or using language apps where you feel like you're in a vacuum, you'll learn through weekly bite-sized videos and tutor-led sessions so you can practice what you've learnt and make sure you feel that continuous sense of progress.
别让你之前的英文成果慢慢流失，也别再让你学英文的动力摇摇晃晃了。今天就开始行动吧。
This is your one-stop shop to boost your English. And if it doesn't become your new favorite thing, I'll eat my hat.
报名即将截止，赶快到 czwu.com/culture 了解更多课程详情吧。
So, as we were saying, people like to have a distinct personality in individualistic cultures. But when it comes to actually getting things done at work, in my experience, sometimes the more personality someone has and the more of a character they like to put forward, the slower things can actually be, because it's kind of like there's this extra noise beyond the task at hand. For example, as a manager, imagine you say something like, "Hey, would you mind fixing that thing when you get a chance?" If the answer is, yes, absolutely, task done, the process is probably going to be pretty smooth, especially if they did actually get the thing done well and you didn't even need to say anything else to them. This has knock-on effects for the next tasks and so on. Compare that to if the answer was, "Sure, I'll have some time this afternoon. It's been a crazy hectic day and I'm just getting my ducks in a row." Lots of people in England would think this is really nice. It's more personal, and bonus points for people who are funny. Maybe someone says, "Yeah, sorry, I've actually been meaning to get to that. My morning totally derailed when my cat knocked over my coffee. I had to reset all my passwords. Anyway, long story, but yes, I'll get to it after lunch." If you want a fun, dynamic team where there's banter and jokes and good vibes, you might want to hire the person with more personality. But if you just want to get things done, is that really necessary? Or is it just baggage? Now, don't get me wrong, there's definitely an awareness that there can be too much personality too. Like if you hear someone say, "He's a big character," that often means he might not necessarily gel with everyone. And you probably don't want to have too many big characters in the same team because they might clash. These are the challenges many managers face. I guess ultimately how much individuality you want in your team comes down to whether you're prioritizing innovation or efficiency. Western cultures have typically been pretty good at innovation in the past. I think that comes with the territory of valuing the individual voice and creativity. But maybe the efficiency part could be improved, according to my point in this video anyway. Another trait common in individualistic cultures is everyone has to have a say, or at least everyone wants a say. They want their individual opinions to be valued, right? The downside of everyone having to give their 2 cents all the time is that some people will hog the conversation for a full 5 minutes without leaving a pause for you to chime in.
我自己也常常有这样的困扰，不知道怎么在不失礼的情况下结束聊天，因为会怕对方因此不开心。 虽然有时候好像他们也没注意到我早就已经 fade out 了。But besides this sometimes rudeness and obliviousness to other people, talking a lot might also relate to the UK being what's called a low context culture. So why do people tend to talk more in low context cultures, and what is a low context culture? Well, in low context cultures, people tend to say what they mean clearly and directly, and they don't assume the listener knows what they're talking about. By contrast, in high context cultures, people rely more on shared assumptions, unspoken rules, and reading between the lines. The UK isn't extremely low context, like we still have a lot of indirectness, which can be confusing for people who aren't used to it. Think things like, I'm afraid that's not going to be possible, to mean no, or you might want to consider this, to mean you should definitely do this. But compared to a lot of East Asia, the UK is more low context, and the US even more so. That means people don't just understand what you mean without you having to explain it in detail. And people will sometimes go to lengths to explain what they mean, which takes time, which maybe slows everything down. Yet another reason for slowness, also related to individualism, is work-life balance. In collectivist cultures like in East Asia, the idea of the self is more relational. It's expected to shift depending on the situation. But in the West, the ideal often seems to be a distinct, consistent personality. And honestly, I think that can be a bit of a mind for people actually. Because let's be real, we do act differently depending on the context. Is there such thing as a fixed self? This is getting a bit deep, but an interesting thought, and actually links to the Buddha's teaching on no self. So anyway, because personal time is valued in individualistic cultures, rushing isn't polite. And that gives rise to work-life balance. People might simply not reply after 5 p.m. because that's rest time, and personal time should be respected. That might explain why it takes so long to get an email response or to get anything done for that matter. In the UK, we're not as bad as the French, that's for sure. I mean, over there, I swear shops shut 12 till 2 for lunch. They shut Sundays, they shut Mondays, sometimes even Tuesdays. But anyway, because of this emphasis on work-life balance and people's freedom to do things in their own way, in their own time, you're probably not going to be well received if you push too much. Many people value politeness, and being too pushy can sometimes be seen as rude. 所以我自己会将西方效率比较低这件事归罪于个人主义。Now, I don't mean to shit on individualism per se. At its core, individualism is about saying the individual has intrinsic worth. It's life-affirming, and I think the world might be a much colder, darker place if we didn't have this value at all. I mean, so many people from other countries often move towards countries that value the individual, often because they're escaping some kind of oppression, whether it's the quieter, subtler kind, like a controlling family that restricts your life choices, or the perhaps more troubling governmental kind. But there are some trade-offs with individualism, and one might be slower work efficiency. 个人主义还可能有这些缺点, but what do you think? Do you agree? Let me know in the comments. 把握这个机会，今天就来提升你的英文视力和文化素养，赶快在报名截止前加入我们的全方位英语文化课程哦！等不及在课堂上见到你了。